many BRICS countries are also negotiating trade agreements with the United States and would like to preserve ties to the United States. But there was a lot of speculation that perhaps for Xi Jinping, it just, it wasn't important enough. The positive aspect of Xi Jinping and Putin not being at the summit was that the Brazilian media has given, even greater coverage, not only to Modi being the most important figure at the BRICS Summit.
Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Hindustan Times and my name is Aayesha Varma. The all-important BRICS Summit took place in Brazil's Rio de Janeiro on July 6th and 7th with an ultimate vision of shaping a multipolar world order. AI governance, climate change, geopolitical issues, greater economic cooperation, and more was discussed. To analyze this, we would like to welcome Oliver Stuenkel, a professor of international relations in Brazil.
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Firstly, what exactly is your take on how the Brazilian president handled the presidency of the BRICS Summit, especially if we look at his response to Trump's 100% tariff threat? There's one statement of his which is catching on, and that is, and I quote, "We don't want emperors."
So, Aisha, exactly. The BRICS, in principle, I think, are going through a crucial moment because of recent expansion. So we used to have 5 countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And then in 2023, an expansion was agreed on. These countries joined last year. Earlier this year, Indonesia also was added alongside with Iran, the United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia, Egypt. So that has changed a bit the dynamics, and I think has made finding consensus slightly more challenging. But at the same time, also there's a perception that the geopolitical turbulence, in part caused by the unpredictability of US foreign policy, is actually an argument in favor of BRICS and makes BRICS more necessary. So because of that, I think Brazil has sought to focus above all on consensual topics, sought to avoid tricky geopolitical sensitive issues. After all, many BRICS countries are also negotiating trade agreements with the United States and would like to preserve ties to the United States. Brazil, for example, also has a strong partnership to the US. So what the Brazilian government did was emphasize issues such as strengthening intra-BRICS ties, as you said, AI governance, economic development, strengthening people-to-people ties. And in general, I think it was quite a successful summit. I think it also, interestingly enough, gave a lot of visibility to Prime Minister Modi, in part because Xi Jinping wasn't there, Vladimir Putin wasn't there. So he was by far the most visible political figure. And I think that also comes as a useful moment as Brazil tries to strengthen bilateral ties to India.
Absolutely. We're curious. Why do you think BRICS is not moving ahead with de-dollarization on a bolder level? Do you think that that's what the strategy is at this point, smaller moves that have larger ripple effects?
Yeah, so I think there's a tension between BRICS countries. I think Russia, Iran, perhaps China would like to move faster on projects involving de-dollarization. But India, Brazil, South Africa are slightly more skeptical because their strategy can be really called something like multi-alignment, right? I mean, they would like to strengthen ties to other BRICS countries, but not at the expense of ties to the United States. And they do know that this is something that is, important to President Trump. He has repeatedly threatened BRICS and said that any attempt to establish alternatives to the dollar would cause a tariff response. So this is clearly on the radar of President Trump. So I think, as you say, the response is to make incremental responses, facilitate payments in local currency, which is a significant step, but for now falls short of actually challenging the dollar head on. So I think we'll see smaller steps And this is also an issue that the Modi government will now discuss as it takes over the BRICS presidency in preparation of the next year's summit in India.
Absolutely. You had just touched upon this just a short while ago, but there were two important BRICS leaders who were missing. There was Putin, of course, due to the Russia-Ukraine war and the ICC arrest warrant. Beyond this, you also had the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, with no confirmed reason as to why he skipped for the first time in 12 years. What is your take on the optics of this, and why do you think the Chinese president did not attend?
So Xi has actually been at all the summits for the past years, has always prioritized this. This is the first time that China's president has not been at the summit. He did come to Brazil in November last year for the G20 summit, and where lots of agreements were announced. And then Lula met him in Beijing in May, and yet again, lots of agreements have been announced. So there was a lot of speculation that perhaps for Xi Jinping, it just, it wasn't important enough. There weren't enough announcements to be made to yet again fly for 24 hours to Brazil. Those of us in Latin America who study Asia know that it's a long trip. There may have been a consideration also that the United States and China are in the midst of a very difficult negotiation that requires Xi Jinping to prioritize that. But it was certainly seen a bit as a snub by the Brazilian government. It wasn't only Xi Jinping; it was also that there were several other heads of state not present. So that has changed the summit a bit. Of the 10 BRICS members, only 5 were represented by their heads of government. But given that BRICS, I think right now with the current dynamics with Trump, sought to fly a bit below the radar, that may not have been a bad thing. I don't expect this to be the new normal, and I would believe that at next year's summit, we probably have more heads of state.
All right, we'll just have to wait and see when that happens. With new additions to BRICS like Egypt, Indonesia, Iran, etc., there is a growing perspective that the bloc is becoming irrelevant. 1, do you agree? 2, what exactly is holding the bloc back?
So the bloc is certainly becoming more representative of the global south, no doubt. You now have an incredible amount of countries, but you clearly also import division. I mean, in April, the foreign ministers of BRICS met for a preparatory meeting in Rio, and they weren't able to agree on the final text of a communique. I mean, they couldn't actually agree on a text. Why? Because usually when the BRICS issue a statement, it does emphasize the ambition of Brazil, India, and South Africa to play a more visible role at the United Nations. And that's a way to say that the BRICS support these 3 countries as they seek to be part of the UN Security Council in a permanent fashion. Now, since Egypt and Ethiopia now join, they would not agree to the inclusion of South Africa in the text. And that shows that there's, of course, division on the African continent. And by consequence, there's now also division within BRICS on the matter. So yes, less agility, certainly more representation, but that's a major challenge for future BRICS presidencies to actually be able to make specific recommendations and develop specific projects on issues that matter to the world, like climate change, like the conflict in the Middle East. And that will certainly become more difficult now the more countries join the grouping.
And speaking of climate change and also circling back to what you were earlier talking about, the relationship that India and Brazil share, the proverbial red carpet was rolled out for India's Prime Minister, a state dinner with Brazil's president being honored with Brazil's highest civilian award. Both nations have outlined how much of a priority the environment is in the face of climate change. How deep does this friendship go, and what pushes India and Brazil to have a good partnership?
So in many ways, Brazil and India actually face similar challenges, are also very large continental size countries, which are very diverse, are set to play an important role in the global economy. But their bilateral relationship is actually still not that important. Trade stands around 12 billion, not really a lot. And actually, Lula has said that we need to triple that. We need to increase that So it's very limited when you compare, let's say, Brazil's trade to China. So I think the effort will be to broaden that, because both India and Brazil now understand that in a multipolar order, you really need to diversify. You need to have as many, both friendships and trade relationships to become more flexible, have strategic wiggle room, as neither China nor India want to take sides in the moment of tension between the United States and China. So the discussions revolved around the potential of increasing defense ties. I think Brazil, very dependent on U.S. equipment, would like to diversify now in a situation where the United States is threatening the sovereignty of another Latin American country, Panama. So that's certainly one concern. Both, I think, have incredible potential on the agricultural side. Brazil is a major powerhouse. So I think that's an issue. Biofuels. So there's many areas where one could increase trade. I think also when it comes to reforming global governance, fighting climate change, there's a lot of alignment. People-to-people ties are still very limited. There's the number of university partnerships, civil society connections is still incipient. So I think that is one of the personal ambitions of the Brazilian president. And as I said, the positive aspect of Xi Jinping and Putin not being at the summit was that the Brazilian media has given even greater coverage, not only to Modi being the most important figure at the BRICS Summit, but also to the state visit now, which is, I think, a signal that these two countries have both a lot in common. They would both like to strengthen ties, and I think realize and recognize the significant potential that exists in that relationship.
Absolutely. Mr. Stuenkel, my final question here. How do you see the relevance of BRICS when we compare it to a G7 or a G20 in the face of global conflicts that are only continuing to increase?
So we're now in an increasingly fragmented geopolitical scenario. Even G7 nowadays can hardly agree on much. I mean, they've in past summits not issued a joint declaration because of divisions between the United States and Europe. BRICS certainly has an inbuilt tension because India and China have a contentious relationship as well. There's on issues such as the Middle East. You see that BRICS, for example, issued a statement on the military strikes on Iran, which was quite vague because there's not an exact agreement on how to word this and how to articulate the, how to describe the situation, how to develop recommendations. So BRICS is clearly relevant as a grouping that can set the agenda, but and on occasional topics. But one should not romanticize the grouping and think that it is capable of easily setting the tone, establishing new institutions, and speaking with one voice. Because on a lot of issues, you do have divisions, which, as I said, these divisions are bound to become more visible with expansion. So I think on some issues, yes, but on many others, we'll have sort of minilateral ad hoc coalitions of countries that find together, like Brazil and India, for example, which certainly can agree on a lot. So they can sometimes make joint statements rather than all of the BRICS together.
All right, Oliver, thank you so much for joining us and giving us such interesting insight, especially when it comes to the relationship that India and Brazil share.
Thank you for inviting me, Aayesha.